With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Chav Beis, starting the second chapter. The second Perek, the following 6 daf, plus a bit, will be all about the pious, the lotteries that took place every day. And the lottery was the medium through which we determined which kohen of that Beis Av, of that Mishmar, was zoicha to do that specific avodah. Now we're going to begin with the lottery that was made for the Trumas Hadeshen. As we'll see, as we already learned in the previous shiurim, that the Trumas Hadeshen was done prior to the morning. Actually, we learned that the Yom Tif, it was done noch before Chatzois. But Trumas Hadeshen will be considered the avodas that are done in preparation for the new day's avodah. And Trumas Hadeshen initially, Barishayna at first, was not given to the kohen through a lottery. We're going to learn initially how was it determined which kohen will have the schus to separate the ash from the altar, the daily avodah of Trumas Hadeshen, and then we will learn why is it that we changed the original system, and ultimately Trumas Hadeshen became like every other avodah, that it was given to a kohen through, in the singular, pious. Just to know, pious is spelled Pei Yud Yud Samach, or through the avodos were given to the kohanim through payasim, through lotteries. Now we're going to learn about a lot of Agadata today. We're going to learn about the concept that asur limnois es Yisrael afilu l'dvar mitzvah, that one may not directly count the Yidden, even if the count is for a mitzvah. We're going to be learning about the 2 times that Shaul HaMelech needed to count the Yidden to know how many soldiers he has. That was regarding a war that he waged right prior to him being appointed the Melech Yisrael. Then we're going to learn about another counting that he did prior to the Milchama that he waged against Amalek. Both of them are Milchemes Mitzvah. Of course, Amalek is Milchemes Mitzvah, but any war that's to defend the Jewish people is called a Milchemes Mitzvah. Yet Shaul HaMelech did not count the people directly. David HaMelech made a mistake. Hashem made him forget this din, and he did one time take a census, making a head count, directly counting the people, and the terrible David, a terrible plague, broke out, and 70,000 Yidden passed away. And that's going to lead us into a whole discussion, which we will contrast or compare David HaMelech and Shaul HaMelech. And the Gemara is ultimately going to say that how spared from sickness and worry is one who does tshuva and puts his or her trust in Hashem. And that will explain, as the Gemara will say, that David HaMelech had 2 failings, but yet the kingdom is forever to David and his descendants. And Shaul HaMelech made 1 mistake, and that costed him the Melucha. Now we're going to have, God willing, I hope to remember, I remember one of the Yechidus that the Rebbe had with Rabbi Mordechay Elyahu of blessed memory, a Yechidus that became public. In other words, we have access to watch some of it. The Rebbe was telling Rabbi Mordechay Elyahu that a king, Mamish, does not have Bechira, right? Leiv Melachim B'Yad Hashem, and right away he challenged the Rebbe, why was Shaul HaMelech punished? If he had no Bechira, then it wasn't his who chose not to kill Agag, not to kill the choicest of the sheep. As we'll learn some details in the Gemara, it's mashma that he also did not kill all of the young Amalekim. And the Rebbe didn't answer the question. The Rebbe simply reiterated forcefully that Shaul HaMelech had no Bechira. Actually, it's a Gemara in Yoma Daf Chav Beis, as we'll learn at the end clearly, that God took away the power of its choice. The Gemara doesn't say these words, but the Gemara is wondering, and through what we will learn, we will indeed see that this is the case. We will be learning a lot more. Let us start in the beginning of the Perek, again, Daf Chav Beis, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud, beginning with the Mishnah, Barishayna at first. Says the Mishnah, Barishayna at first, initially, Kol mi sheroitza litra mesam mizbeach toirim. The Trumas Hadeshen, daily separating, removing 1 shovel full of ash off the altar, was not given to a kohen. It was not decided through a pious, through a lottery, but simply they announced whichever kohen will arrive first will get that avodah. And that's what happened. Whoever woke up and arrived first, actually it wasn't an exact science as to what time they did it. That is what we learned right in the previous, that's what we learned 2 daf ago on Daf Chav. It was samuch to the Kriyas HaGever. It was by midnight. It was at the end of the first watch. However, even when you determined whoever comes first will get it, what happens if two Kohanim come at the same time? So the Mishnah says there was a Seder. When there were many means if there were two or more. In other words, Kohanim arrived at the same time, so then they made a foot race. Exactly what it sounds like. They made a race, and the Kohen that would win the race would get the schos of Trumas Hadeshen. Exactly where would they race? Ratzin v'oilin bakevish. They would run up the ramp which led up to the altar. Right, we know the ramp had 32 amas. And the Mishnah says that Kol hakoidim es chaveira ba'arba amas, whoever came first into, as the Gemara will clarify, into the last 4 amas on the top of the Mizbeach. So if the ramp had 32 amas, so whoever, it's mashma, whoever reached the 28 amma line, whoever entered the top 4 amas, he was zoich. And what happens if you have a race and 2 people arrive at the same time? All right? And not that the Mishnah here is opining in this whole topic, if Esher Letzamtzem, remember the sugya, Efsher Letzamtzem, we're not going into the details whether you can actually do 2 things exactly at the same time or not. We're speaking about, the referee, whoever, the memuna, the one that's in charge, is looking at this 2 kahanim. It appears that they arrived at the same time. So then, the memuna is actually, there was a temple administrator that was in charge, that was appointed over the lotteries. He was sometimes called the memuna al hapayosois. That's in the plural. All right, remember guys that we learned that in Shkolem, from the 15 offices that we had in the Beis HaMikdash, one office was the one that was in charge over the lotteries. So if he, for him, it appeared like both Kohanim hit the same as you see in the beautiful picture, the line that's 4 amas before the top of the Mizbeach. I know I repeated this twice, but the Gemara really will have a question whether it is the top 4 amas, maybe the top 6 amas. So Amar Lahem, only then would he say what he normally would when they made a lottery. And now we're going to speak out how were the lotteries made, and even Barishaina, if it came down to a tie, then he said Hatzbiu. Now the word Hatzbiu means put out a finger. Rashi over here goes through the process that we'll learn later in this Perek of what happened. All of the Kohanim that wanted to have the schus of doing any specific avodah, in our case, the Kohanim that appeared to come to the finish line of this foot race at the same time, they would make a circle around the memuna. And as you can see in the picture, a picture from above, right? So the memuna stood in the center. All of the Kohanim stood around him. All of the Kohanim that came in a tie stood around him. He would first remove the hat of a Kohen. That's step number 1. Step number 2 was he would say the words Hatzbiu. Or we'll see in the Gemara, actually he said clearly, put out your finger. Now, they will see later that the thumb was a finger that they were not allowed to put out. They were allowed to put out 1 or 2 fingers. More details in the Gemara. Then he would pick a random number that's way bigger than the people that are standing around him. So here the picture looks like there's like 30 Kohanim or 20 Kohanim. He would shout number, 120. Or in our case, there were 2 or 3 Kohanim that came to the top at the same time, or it appeared to him they came at the same time. He would shout out a number 18 Chai. And then he would start counting from the Kohen who's hatless. And he would count the fingers, never the people. We never count people. We never make a head count. Counting fingers. And the Kohen upon whom the number reaches, that's the Kohen that will be the Zacha B'Goydel. We're going to repeat this later when we learn in Gemara more details about the Goydel. So only then would he say Hatzbiu. And here the Mishnah gives a detail of Mahei Moitziim, what fingers are they allowed to stick out? Achas Oishtayim, 1 or 2. However, Ve'ein Moitziin Agudal B'Mikdash, the thumb, not the coin that stuck out 1 finger was allowed to stick out a thumb. Not a coin who chose to stick out 2 fingers was allowed to stick out the thumb as one of the 2. Thumb was not allowed to be used. So this was all the Barishaina. However, Dr. Mishnah, Maisa happened once. That 2 people were arriving. They arrived at the same time. They woke up literally. And therefore, if 2 people or more arrive at the same time, step number 2 was to make a foot race. So they were both running up the ramp. One person felt that he might be losing. He didn't want the competition. So what he did was, v'dachav echad mehen es chaveroi, one pushed off the other off the ramp. Now the ramp, guys, went up, the Mizbeach goes up 10 amas, or at least the top of the Mizbeach is 9 amas, that's a nice height, and v'nafal, and one kohen fell, v'nishbar al and he broke his leg. Everyone is trying to see the Rebbe, we're pushing in 770, but one person can break the leg of the other. Yishkoyach, so what did you accomplish? So the Kivin Shiro, Bezdin, Shabbat, when they saw that this is a good picture, just parenthetically, of where they would put the ash down, which was towards the east of the ramp. So when Bezdin saw that this is a dangerous way to determine, so Hiskino, then they made a takana, Shalayu, Tarben, Esamizbech, Elaba Pious, that they should only use the lottery, just to know that the word pious comes from the word of pius, which means to appease, because everyone says, I want to win. Everyone accepted that whoever was Zoicha B'Goydel, people are appeased. Well, he had the mazel, he won the Goydel. That's why we call the lottery, B'Lashon Yachid, again, pious. It's the way the Hasidish should pronounce what we call pious. Now, says the Mishnah, Arba Payosois Choyo Sham, that you should know that after they made even the Trumas Hadeshin giving out through a lottery, now every day there were 4 payosois and vizeh payos rishon, and this is the first lottery, the lottery of who will win the schus of the Trumas Hadeshin. Now, just to know the following, that the Baal HaMa'or, and we have been learning last Perek following Hishita holds that this Mishnah is Dafka not speaking about Yom Kippur. So yes, we're learning Masechta Yoma, but we're taking a step back. We're learning now about the bigger picture, because on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol was the only one that did all of the avodas, including an avodah that's done every day as well, which would mean including the Trumas Hadeshin. Okay, just to be aware that the other Rishonim, there's a Ramban, there's a Rambam that have other opinions, but we were following the sheet of the Baal HaMa'or. So everything that we're learning now is dafka not on the day of Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara, let's go back to the beginning. The Mishnah says that initially, at first, there wasn't a lottery. Whoever comes first would get that avodah. But why would this be different? It's like manashtana. Every avodah was determined through a pius. Answers the Gemara, explains the Gemara, initially they were of the understanding, even the avodas lailahi, that they viewed the Trumas Hadeshin as a avodah of the night. It's being done pre-dawn, but they viewed it as a night avodah, which means they viewed it as an avodah of lesser importance or of lesser significance. So therefore, loy chashiv elahu, it was not considered chashuv. They didn't feel that they have to make a lottery. V'lo yasu, right? And people didn't come to go get, I'm going to wake up just to go into a lottery. Stam, I won't win the lottery. So they made it more attractive. How do you make it more attractive? This avodah, there's no lottery. If you come there first, you'll get it. That was a motivation. However, Taka motivated people. Even the chazu that they came, and not one guy, 2 people, 3 people, and they made the foot race, and ultimately, as we learned in the Mishnah, so then at the end, takinu la payasa like everything else. Says the Gemara, 1 second. The burning of the limbs of the fats, and of the fats, the parts of the karbanis that have to be burnt on the pyre. Right? And that is considered l'chayre the avodas lailahi, because they certainly may burn the entire night. And even though the mitzvah lachatchila was to bring it up during the day, but as we learned in Psachim, as we will continuously learn in Kachim, that those parts of the carbon that have to be burnt on the altar may initially be brought up only at night, as they were many times. And yet, v'takino la rabbanan payasa. Nevertheless, there was never a barishayna. That was who was zoicha to bring up the chalavim ve'evarim, or the evarim and the pedarim, the limbs and the fats, only the kind that won the lottery. But you're telling me that a night avodah never needed a lottery? The Gemara says, well, this is not a night avodah. It could have been brought up at night, but initially it should be brought up during the day. So it's considered soif avodah the yamamahi. It's the end of the day's avodah. It was always viewed as something more chashiv. But asks the Gemara, just like the burning of the fats is considered the end of the day's avodah, hainami tchilas avodah the imamihi. Why are we not viewing? Why didn't they view the Trumas Hadeshin as the beginning of the day's avodah, even though it was done pre-dawn. The Kohen Gadol did it at midnight, even Bisman Yom Tov, where they did it before midnight, at the end of the first watch. But it's all the preparation for the new day. And actually, as we find the words that Rabbi Yochanan used, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kiddush Yadav L'Truma Sadeshin, if a Kohen, before the Avodah, would always have to sanctify his hands and his feet by using the Kiyod, if he did so in order to be able to run up and to remove the ashes, he doesn't have to do Kiddush Yadayim at the break of dawn. Now this is important to remember, as Rashi reminds us from Zvachim, right, the first wide line under the Gemara. If a Kohen washed his hands today, Monday, and he did the Avodah, and he had no Hesach Hadas, he was mindful, he'd never left the temple complex, he worked through the night, you know what? By dawn, he has to wash his hands again. Because Lina, simply the fact that his hands and feet were overnighted, you got to make a new washing for the new day's avodah. On that, says Rabbi Yochanan, even Rebbe, who spoke about this importance of Lina, right, that it's going to take away the validity of yesterday's washing of the hands and feet, which means you have to wash it again. If you washed your hands to do Trumas Hadeshen, even though, again, it's done pre-dawn, you don't have to wash your hands again by the crack of dawn. And here are the words, Shekfar Kiddush Mitchilas Avoida. That was the initial words that we had from Rabbi Yochanan, because he had sanctified his hands for the beginning of the day's Avoida. For the beginning of the Avodah means for the beginning of the new day's Avodah. So you see again, it's considered the beginning of the day's Avodah. Why did people find it not chashuv? So the Gemara says, no, we got the words of Rabbi Yochanan wrong. Rabbi Yochanan didn't say that the sanctification was for the beginning of the day's Avodah. Ema shekvar kiddush mitchila le'avodah. He sanctified his hands already before dawn for the sake of service, not for the sake of the day service. It's the same din. Same din is that since Trumas Hadeshen is a step that's done pre the new day, so Rebbe felt that you don't have to be mekadosh your hands again at dawn. But he never viewed Trumas Hadeshen as the beginning of the day's avodah. It's considered that which comes pre the day's avodah, but it is not the day's avodah. It's not viewed that way, and therefore people did not find it that chashuv. That's one version. Ikada Amri, in other words, again, we're trying to understand why is it that at first there was no payos for the Trumas Hadeshen. Because MERCAVA Savar, they found, they initially saw, and really one is connected to the other. It's just different sides of the same coin. Kivan the Ika Oina Sheina, since we did separate the ashes right before daybreak, before dawn. People, that's the nature of a person. When you are in bed and you know you got to wake up, many people hit the snooze button. It's not so easy to get out of bed. It's called Oines Sheina. The sleep is seducing you, it's like forcing you to stay in bed. So lo yasu, again, a person says, I'm going to get up for what? To go into a lottery that nastama I'll lose. So they said, no, whoever comes first gets it. That was what was needed to motivate people. And indeed it worked. And Kivan, the Chazal, the Asu, when they saw that it does work, as we learned in the Mishnah, working means not only did one Kohen come, but more than one came. So then they instituted the foot race. Then eventually, the day Sakana, so Takinu Larabanan Payas. Here again asks the Gemara, hold on, putting on the limbs at night. Now, if they were not put during the day, they have to put it at night. If you're telling me that there's an oines shina, that sleep almost forces you to stay in bed or to go into bed, so at night also, people would rather go into bed than to stay up later, right, to go and bring the fats on the altar. So why was that from the outset given through a lottery? The ika oines shina, and yet v'tekino larabanan payasa. The Gemara says you cannot compare the instinct, the yetzer, right, when you're tired, to go to sleep. If it's at night and I didn't enter my bed yet, so taka, my bed is calling my name, but it's easier for me to keep myself awake and to delay my going into bed. That's easier versus if I am already in bed and it's early in the morning and the alarm clock is ringing and I want to remain in bed. That's much harder to get out of bed. Shani migna mi mekam. So since the hardest yetzer of sleep is to stay in bed a little bit longer, not to wake up like a lion, like it says in Shulchan Aruch, So therefore, that's why initially the only avodah that me'ikara was not given out through a payos was the avodah of Trumas Hadesh. I just want to add something, and that is, when we're speaking about avodas hayom, avodas laila, to give it in Hasidic words. You have the avodah of sur meirah, and you have the avodah of asay toiv. L'choyre Trumas Hadeshen is mamish the avodah of sur meirah. You are removing waste. And as we know that it's a lot easier to motivate a yid to do a day avodah, to do a positive avodah, to do a mitzvah, do a mitzvah. Do a mitzvah. Don't do an avodah is much harder. Same concept, just in different words. Again, why l'chatchila they felt, let's give it away easier than the lottery. Now the Gemara asks, v'takanto lahachgis havoi. No, takanto lahachgis havoi. What you're saying is not correct. The Tanya, whoever ultimately won the Trumas Hadeshen didn't only get the schus of removing the ashes, but who also got the schus, and that's something that we learned 2 daf ago. Why is it that on Yom Tov they did the Trumas Hadeshen at the end of the first watch? Because it wasn't just the removing of a shovel full of ashes. No, they needed to organize the pyre. And it's not so simple, because when the pyre was very busy during the previous day, it's a big balagan on top. We're going to learn later about the 3 pyres, maybe there were 4 marachos, we'll learn all these details. But you had the pyre upon which you put the animals. You had the other pyre that only had wood on it, that were supposed to turn into coals, and these were the coals that were used for the burning of the ketores and the golden altar. So whoever did Trumas Hadeshen, he needed to organize the maracha. Then he needed to bring up the 2 gizrei eitzim, which was the minimum amount of eish min hahedyet that we learned in the last daf. So you see, you're telling me that people, they considered this only a night avodah, and no one was motivated to do it. The whole thing doesn't fit. It wasn't just one thing that they did. They did so many things on top. It's impossible to say that a yid that's going to be zoicha to do the Trumas Hadeshen and the Siddur Maracha and the Shnei Gizrei Eitzrim, what, he has little motivation? No way. Doesn't fit. The whole thing doesn't fit. So the Gemara says, no. There was a step that we skipped. Initially, the Trumas Hadeshen was only Trumas Hadeshen. Everything we said was correct. And people are not going to get out of bed to do Trumas Hadeshen. It's a void of night. It's just sur meirah. So therefore, they gave it away without the lottery. But ultimately, after the foot race and after the one-time danger, so the Chazal said you have to make a lottery. Now they were back with the original problem. Why would I get out of bed if at best I'm only going to win the Trumas Hadeshen, and I consider this a nighttime avodah? I would rather stay in bed. So now at the end, when they went back to the lottery, they added more zechusim to the zacha b'goydel of the Trumas Hadeshen. It should be worthwhile, that should counter the yetzer of sheina. Amar Rav Ashi shtei takonos havu. There are 2 steps over here. Me'ikara savur liyasi. Indeed, what we said was correct. If it would have been given out through a lottery, no one would have come, because it was originally only one avodah, and we call this avodas laila. And I have the yetzer of sleep. You put all this together, the sum total will be, I'm staying in bed. But kivin the chazit, so first they didn't give it out in a lottery, like we mentioned. So many people came. And then ultimately, because of the foot race, also de sakana. So therefore, takino la payasa. But now we're back to the problem. Kivin the takino la payasa, now that it's given out dafka through a lottery, loy asi, they would not come. Why would they not wake up to go into the lottery? They said, who says it's going to fall on me? Who says I'm going to win? I'm staying in bed. So hadur takina lo. So therefore they added that you should know it's worth it. It's worth the risk. Right? Because Misha Zacha b'Trumas Hadeshen won't only win the schus of Trumas Hadeshen, but also Yiska b'Siddur Maracha, u'b'Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, u'b'Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, ki heicha denaisu, in order to motivate the people to come, to enter the lottery, vini paisum. Very good. 2 dots. Referring back to the Mishnah, this is at the first, when there was no lottery yet, if 2 kahanim or more came at the same time, so they determined whoever will reach 4 amos. Now it's not clear exactly what was the end, the final, the winning line. So Amar Rav Papa, Pshitali, when I read the Mishnah, it's clear that 4 amos, the aroloi. certainly whoever comes within the 4 amas is not 4 amas on the ground prior to the ramp. That for sure not. Because the Mishnah says the words Ratzin v'oilin bakevesh tanan. They have to run up. Furthermore, don't tell me that whoever hits the finish line is just the 4 amas lowest to the ground, closest to the ground. That for sure, it doesn't mean that. That kamaisa nami doesn't mean whoever came at the first 4 amas. Loi. Why not? Because the Mishnah says Ratzin v'oilin bakevish, and then it says kol hakoydem es chaveiroi. So it's mashma that even after you begin running up, there's still some more running up you have to do for one to come before the other. It's not early on in the ramp. Furthermore, the end line cannot be in middle of the ramp somewhere. The beini nami loi, because then the Mishnah is vague, and how would we know where to put it? The loi mesaima milsa. The Mishnah didn't say we're in middle. So therefore, concludes Rav Papa pshitali, that what the Mishnah means is the way we learned it, the Gabi Mizbeach Tanan. Gabi means at the very top, that they needed to run up to come within the final 4 amas of the top of the altar. However, now that that is out of the way, I still have a question. I still have an inquiry that will remain unresolved. Is it bahadei ama yisoid va'ama soivev? Does it include the ramp when over the imaginary yisoid? I'm saying imaginary because there wasn't a yisoid, the way we're learning the yisoid in the Mishnah, on the southern side of the Mizbeach, other than in the westernmost corner with 1 amma. Even though we mentioned already that they have Rishonim that learned that there actually was only 1 amma that was missing. But be that as it may, we still call the bottom part of the Mizbeach the Yisoid, and the ramp, remember when we learned the Cheshboinus last week? So we said that if you go from the ramp until the northern wall of the Mizbeach, there's only 62 amas. We asked 1 second, how is there 62 amas? It should be 64 amas, because the Mizbeach is 32, and the ramp is 32. Remember that? And the answer is that the ramp overlaps. It uses 2 amas as the Mizbeach does. There is a sharing of the same 2 amas, the am of the Yisoid, over which the ramp goes, and then when you go over the Yisoid, another 5 amas, or 6 amas above the ground, you have the ledge, the soiviv, upon which Kahanim can walk, that also protrudes in then an amma, and the ramp goes over it. So he wants to know basically, do you say you have to hit the top 4 amas of the Mizbeach or the top 6 amas? In other words, do we include the am of the Yisoid and the am of the ledge, Daf Chav Beis Amid Beis, meaning that you have to come Pashit to the top 4 amas, and the one who got there first is the one that won, or Barma Amma Yisoid, you exclude the am of the Yisoid, exclude the amma that the ramp went over the ledge, the soiviv, which would mean, like Rashi says, that the winner is the one who comes to the top 6th amma of the Mizbeach. That's something that Rav Papa did not have clarity, and indeed, this question stands. Teiku, Mashiach will answer this question. Now, normally, when you have a Teiku, at least when Mashiach will come, the question will be relevant. So maybe it's mashma from the Teiku that in the 3rd Beis HaMikdash, they will perhaps go back to the original race. And that's why we will have to know, okay, what's the end line? Who wins? And why will they go back to the race? Why would we say that? Because this whole concept of a Jew trying to get close to God and hurting his fellow Jew during the way, that's something that's not going to happen when Mashiach comes. But perhaps when Mashiach will come, people, the Avos Yisrael that the Holy Baal Shem Tov just established in all of us is so strong that will be a given. If I want to get close to God, but on my way getting close to God, I'm pushing my fellow Jew off the ramp, that's not something that's going to be shaykh, maybe. And therefore, it's going to go back to the race, and therefore we have to know, is it to the top 4 or to the top 6? In other words, do you have to run up 26 amas? Right, 26 and 6 is 32. Shem Havaya, or do you have to run up koyach? Do you have to run up 28 amas? Okay. Now, ve'im ho yishneim shavim. Even initially, that they didn't give it out through a lottery, but if more than one person came, more than one coin reached the end win line, so then Hamamuna Omer Lahem Hatzbiu, put out your finger, and now we will start learning about how lotteries were done. Just a little bit now, a lot more later. Finally, we learned in the Braisa that the exact words that the Kohen would say to those lucky winners is Hoitziu etzbe'oisechem leminyan. Put out your fingers for account. And in other words, you count the fingers. Comes the simple question, why do you have to stick out fingers and count fingers? Why don't you count them? Or in English, why don't you make a head count? Says the Gemara, this is Misayeya Leil Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak, Asur Limnois as Yisrael, one may not make head counts upon the Jewish people, even if you want to know their number because of a mitzvah. Afil Ledvar mitzvah. The Chsiv, beginning with the first count that Shaul HaMelech took of his soldiers prior for him being coronated as the Melech Yisrael. And we're going to have a little bit more mamash at the end of the Amud, that there was the Ammonites, they made a siege on a place called Yavesh Gilad, and we needed to get soldiers to break the siege. He wanted to know how many soldiers he has. So what did he do? Vayifkedeim babezek, that each soldier took a broken shard of a klei cheres. They had with them an item that was for them very insignificant. Every soldier gave a little piece of broken earthenware, and Shaul HaMelech counted the shards. He didn't count them. Now, gathering soldiers to take a siege off a Jewish city, what greater mitzvah do you have? That's a mitzvah. Still, he didn't count ahead. He counted the shards. Maskav lo Ravashi, how do you know that you're teaching the word bezek is lishna the mivzak, right? The word mivzak means something that's shattered. How do you know that it means something that's shattered, which would mean that each one gave forth a little broken keli that everyone had then? Dilma, maybe there is a name of a city, Shema de Masahu, and actually there is a city that's called Bazak, as it says, Vayimtsu'u Adoini, in the city of Bezek or Bazak. So maybe it means he took a head count in the city of Bezek. You don't have that clear in the pasuk of Shmuel. So Ela Bahacha, fine. So let's go to the next time that we know Shaul HaMelech took a census of his army, and now he's already Melech Yisrael. He was given the order to execute the mitzvah of annihilating the nation of Amalek, and it says indeed that Vayishama Shaul Esam, Shaul had the people summoned. He heard, everyone knew that he called them, he summoned them, and Vayifkedim, and he counted them. But how did he count them? Bataloyim, each one gave a lamb. Not that every soldier gave his lamb out of pocket. No. Shaul HaMelech was so wealthy then that he had a royal herd. Every soldier took a teleh from Shaul HaMelech's herd. And then every soldier gave to whoever was in charge of the count the lamb. And he counted the lambs. Clearly, why didn't you count the people? Melchemes Amalek? Wow, even the reading once a year is a reading Midrash according to many Rishonim. No, it's Takal Melchemes Mitzvah, 100%, but no, you may never count people through a head count. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Kol Amoines Yisrael, whoever does take a head count, he violates a negative commandment over Balav. Again, we're not learning about the Shasa Mitzvah. We're quoting here a pasuk from Nach, from Divrei Kabbalah, but you're over on the negative commandment. It says in Scripture, V'hoyu Misla B'nei Yisrael, that the numbers of the Jewish people will be K'choil Hayam, like the sand of the sea. Asher Lo Yimad literally means which cannot be counted, because it's that numerous, but the drush here is that shall not be counted. Don't count. Actually, the word yimad means measured. That shall not be measured. Don't measure them. So says Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, you know what? If you are quoting this verse, why one lav? Two lavim. Oive b'shtei lavim, because this pasuk says, lo yimad, and literally it means that cannot be measured, but here we're saying that shall not be measured, and the pasuk says, v'lo yisafar, nor counted. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. I want you to know that Rabbi Yonason pointed out the following contradiction. Rabbi Yonason Rami, it says in a pasuk, again, that the numbers of the Jewish people will be like the sand of the sea. Now I know the sand of the sea is a tremendous number, but guys, this world is a limited world. So whatever that number is, it's a finite number. So it's going to be very, very numerous, but there's a number, there's a shiur. The world only is that big. However, it says in that same pasuk, "Asher lo yimad v'lo yisafed," which he understood means that it cannot be measured. It's infinite. It cannot be counted. So, is there a finite number? Is there no finite number? So the Gemara says, like Hashem, Seifa, the Kan, meaning the Seifa of the pasuk, lo yimad v'lo yisafed, is bisman she Yisrael oisim l'tzoyin shel makom. As the Eitz Yosef explains beautifully, that when the Yidden are properly aligned with godliness, then our qualitative Maila is revealed. On the level of quality, we are infinite. A Yid is infinitely great. So there is no measure, there is no number. However, in that moment, the Jewish qualitative greatness is concealed. That which is then only revealed is something which is not of the level of infinity, and therefore there is a number. And Rabbi Yomer, in the name of Abba Yossi ben Doistoi, loy kashem, kan bidei adam. When the Sefer says that we cannot be counted, cannot be measured, when you have a certain high level of number, it's too difficult for people to take account. It's too many. However, bidei shamayim, God knows the number. There is a finite number, but it's like the sand in the sea. How many granules of sand do you have? God knows, but we don't know. Amar Avni Eloi, Bar Idi, in the name of Shmuel. Going back to the two counts that we mentioned. We didn't successfully prove it from the first, because maybe Bezek means the name of a place, but we proved it from the second count. But now that we mentioned the two countings, the moment someone is appointed to be a communal leader, which is what happened in between these two counts. First count, to break the siege of the Ammonites against the Jews, or the city of Yavesh Agilad, was prior for him becoming king. The next count was to Melchamas Amalek after he became king. He became very wealthy. And that's a gift that God gives to communal leaders, to make the nesoyin of bribery lesser of a nesoyin. How do we know that he became wealthy? Because mi'ikodeksiv, when he needed to count them, vayifkedeim bebezek. Let's touch bezek means that every soldier was asked to give a little piece of broken utensil that they all had. And he counted their broken shards. When it comes to the second count, vayifkedeim b'teloim, he counted lambs. He didn't tell them to give a lamb. It means that he had so many lambs that he allowed every soldier to take one of his lambs only for the count. Wow, he became that wealthy. Asks the Gemara, how do you know that the lambs belong to the royal flocks? Maybe the soldiers needed to give out of pocket their own lamb. So the Gemara says the Torah then wouldn't have mentioned anything. The whole point, the whole milsa agav urcha kamashvalan, that he counted them through lambs, wasn't only to teach you that you can't make a head count. It was to show you the wealth of Shaul HaMelech, which isn't unique to Shaul HaMelech, but when God appoints, b'ashgacha pratis, when people appoint by divine providence someone to be a communal leader, they are benched with ashirus. Now that we spoke about the second war against Amalek, a couple of details about that Mulchama. It says Vayodev Banachal, literally that the war, they contended in the valley. The war of Amalek was in a valley. That is the pshat. But we're learning a drash. Vayodev doesn't only mean that there was a contention. There was a Mulchama with the Amalekim. It means that Shaul had a riva. He contended with God using the mitzvah connected to the word Nachal as a reason to do what he did, which was not exactly what God told him to do. In other words, after the war was won, Shaul HaMelech did not king initially. He did not kill Agag, the king of Amalekim. He did not kill the choices of the flocks, which he used as a carbon. And again, from our Gemara, it's mashma, he did not kill the youngsters. The ketanim he didn't kill. And God had a taina on him. Why did you not do what I told you to do? So this is what this was his source for his contention. Vayodev banachal. Amarav mani al iskei nachal. Where do we have nachal? By the Egla Rufa, the end of Shoiftim. That if even one person is found, God forbid, murdered without us knowing who is the murderer, that there is a communal responsibility, right? And the people, then you measure it to the closest city, and they have to bring a Egla, and they go to a nachal, and they have to decapitate the calf. So he told B'shasha Amalek HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'shol Lech v'kisa es Amalek. Amalek means all of them, men, women, children, infants, animals. Amar, the first medium-sized line, Shaul HaMelech, so to say, told God, Ma nefesh achas, when it comes to the taking of even one life, how careful we are. Amar Torah, if a life was taken, you don't find the individual, everyone is guilty. Havei egla rufa. So Shaul HaMelech says, Kol hanafasha is halal, alachas kama v'kama. No, by the way, he killed almost all of them. But Shaul HaMelech felt, now we have to get an atonement. So he was justifying his leaving the choicest of sheep, which was taka offered as a carbon, to find an atonement, to get an atonement for killing all the people. And then he further added, Im Adam Chata, okay, so the people were killed. But Behema, my Chata, what did the animals sin? That we have to kill all of their animals. Im Gedolim Chatu, now the first widest line, the adults, but Ketanim Achatu. And mashma that he didn't kill the Ketanim. So Yatsa Baskal v'Amrullah al tihi tzadik harbe. This is such an important. Don't be azat tzadik. Now you are overly righteous. And knowing, the Gemara in between the lines is going to say that people that all of a sudden are overly righteous, we're speaking about do what God says, will at one time become overly cruel. And indeed, that is what happened later. That when Doeg told Shaul that Noiv Ir HaKohanim gave refuge and weapons and food to David, Shaul HaMelech had the entire city killed. All of the Kohanim in Noiv, the Kohanim were killed. Because Doeg, who was the one who gave over the Lashon Hara, so he told Shaul, tells Doeg, Soiv Ata, you circle the city, Upaga b'Kohanim, and kill all the Kohanim. So then Yatsa Baskal, and he tells him, Al Tir Shahar, but don't be overly wicked. See, he was overly tzaddik by the Amalekim, and then he was overly wicked to Kohanim, and that's the way it is. We have to do what God wants. People that all of a sudden say, how can God tell me to do this? I want to be nicer. That person will be cruel in some other area. Omar Afuna, I want you to know, now that we spoke about Shaul, and you see Shaul, Al Pi Seichel, had a justification. The problem was he didn't do what God wanted. So contrast him with David HaMelech. Kama loy chali v'loy margish. How spared from sickness, how spared from margish, how spared from worry, from daiga, from anxiety, is a man, the Mordechay that God helps. David HaMelech had a special siyata d'shmaya that one could argue he failed more than Shaul, but much less happened as a consequence. Shaul ba'achas, that was his one failing, and va'olsoloi. And that one failing was reckoned against him. He lost his melucha. David, b'shtayim. And even though he had two failings, nothing was reckoned on that level. The kingdom is David's forever. And the Gemara says, Shaul ba'achas mahi. Number one was Ma'aseh Agag. It's Agag that he didn't kill. It was the choices of sheep, the ketanim, but it was that one moment. And that's it, reckoned, he lost, the kingdom was ripped from him. So the Gemara says that only Achaz, didn't you just mention Noivira Kohanim? What, isn't that also a sin? So the Gemara says, yeah, that was also a sin. But even if Shaul would not have killed out all of the Kohanim in Ir Noiv, he already lost his kingdom. What caused him to lose his kingdom was only one sin. Amaisa da Agag, it says that God, Kaviyachal says, Nichamtim, I regret. Ki himlachti es Shaul lemelech, that I anointed Shaul as a king. Oh, now David b'shtayim ma'ininu. For some reason, people have a machla. They jump to speak about David's sins. It's coming from a very unholy place. And don't even jump, because the Gemara is going to mention something that you're not thinking about. Number one is Uriah. We're not mentioning Bathsheba here. We'll get to that later. The Gemara will get to that later. Uriah, being that David HaMelech wanted Uriah to go back into his tent. And Uriah said, how can I go back into my tent when all of my colleagues, all of my soldiers, and the Aron itself is out in the battle? He did not listen to David. He was a moeded b'malchus. So therefore, David HaMelech sent him to go to the front, which was the way he condemned him to die. So that was considered a sin for David. That the fact that he sent Uriah to the front of the battle. And the second failing of David was the fact that one time he took a head count which aroused Uda Hassasa. It incited the Satan, it incited some negative reaction, and indeed a plague came because of that head count, and 70,000 Eden passed away. And yet, even though he made a head count, he never lost his kingdom. You know why? Because he did tshuva. And God therefore helped him. Shaul HaMelech on this did not do tshuva. He did not own up his sin. Faket, like we just said above, he justified his sin. He told God, "You kidding? Im adam chata behema machata, im gedolim chatu ketana my chatu." Oh, I ask the Gemara now, but why didn't you mention even the 13? V'hoikanam emaisa de Bathsheba? Even though it's not that Bathsheba was a married woman, right? Kol hayoytze lemalchames beis David koisav get krisus leishta. She was not a married woman, but for David HaMelech, being that if Uriah would have survived, he would have remarried her, it was considered at that time not ethical for him to have a relation with her. So the Gemara says, oh, for that he was taka punished. Hassan, a punishment was exacted from David. As it says, what was the conversation Nassan HaNavi had with David? He tells him there was a wealthy man and a poor man. The wealthy man had all these animals, and the neighbor, the poor, had only one little ewe, one little female lamb. And then when a guest came, whose animal did he take to feed the guest? Then the poor ewe. So David HaMelech says, for that, the esakipsa yishalom arbosayim, he should have to pay fourfold. So indeed, that's the way Nassan HaNavi reprimanded David, that you have so many wives. Uriah only had one wife. You went and took her wife, 4 punishments. And what were the 4 punishments? Bekitzer, Yeled. Yeled is that when she got pregnant from that relation, that child was lost. That fetus was lost, died. The next one was Shloimeh. So Yeled, number 1 is the story of Amnon, right? That Amnon was killed after he raped Tamar. So Tamar's brother Avshalom murdered. Now Amnon was David HaMelech's son, so he lost Amnon. The fact that his daughter Tamar was raped, that's the 3rd punishment from his perspective, and the fact that Avshalom was killed. So asks the Gemara, hold on, if you're telling me that we are not counting a sin from which a punishment was exacted from him, Hasam Nami, the counting that he erroneously counted the people, a head count, he also was punishment was exacted from him, as it says that Vayite in Hashem David, that God placed a plague on the Yidden from a certain moment until until a certain set time, and 70,000 Yidden passed away. So the Gemara says, 70,000 people passed away, but that's from the Jewish people, not in the body of David HaMelech. The body of David did not pay the price. Hold on. The 4 terrible things that happened to David, Yeled, Amnon, Tamar, and Avshalom, were also not his guf. I just want to suggest, maybe the Havamina is that all of the 4 are his children. For many people, that's called gufei. Yeled was his son. Amnon was his son. Tamar was his daughter. Avshalom was his son. The 70,000 Yidden were not biologically gufei. They were not his descendants. But the Gemara is saying, no, Mistama Tzadik, David was the Tzadik, An-Nasi. Every Yid is an extension. We're all part. Yes, gufei. So either it's all considered gufei or non-considered gufei. So the Gemara says, no. No, there was something else that we didn't mention. David HaMelech was punished bodily, and that was a punishment for Bathsheba. Shisha Chadoshim Nitztara David. David HaMelech was a Mitzayra. He had Saras for 6 months. And during that time, the Sanhedrin left him. And therefore, because joy left him. And that's the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim where he's crying out, Yoshuvu li yire'echa, please return to me those who fear God. He's referring to the Sanhedrin. Return to me implies that they left him. Return to me yoidei eidoisecha, those who knows your statutes, the Sanhedrin. And he also said, Hashiva li, return to me sasin yishecha, the joy of your salvation, which is the Shechina. So good. So now we see that for Bathsheba he was punished bodily, but for the other 2 sins of Uriah and for the incitement that he caused through making a head count, David HaMelech had some siyata d'shmaya, and he was not reprimanded the way Shaul was for 1 sin. There's another sin of David. Guys, we learned this Shabbos Daf Nun Vav, and that is when David HaMelech, because of the covenant he made with Yonasan, the son of Shaul, he wanted to know whether there are any family members left. And there was one son of Yonasan called Mipi Boishes, remember? And David HaMelech made sure that all of the real estate of that family should go under the possession of Mipi Boishes. Now Mipi Boishes had a slave, had an eved called Tziva. When David HaMelech was running away from Avshalom, Tziva said a lashon hara on his master. It was not true. He said that my master is siding with Avshalom. He wants to become the king again. And because of that, David HaMelech depossessed Mipi Boishes from his real estate, and he gave it to his slave Tziva. Later on, even later, so let's go over here about David, that Kibel David lashon hara from Tziva against Mipi Boishes. So it's a third sin. So the Gemara says it must be that the one who said that David sinned twice, Uriah and Hassasa, follows the Shita of Shmuel that holds that David did not believe the Lashon Hara of Tziva. And furthermore, the Gemara says, and even according to Rav, that says that Nami the Amar Kibel David Lashon Hara, that David HaMelech did at least, he didn't give full credibility, but he said he doesn't know. He doesn't know who's saying the truth. You know what David HaMelech said? David HaMelech said, Oy Bazoi, after Mephibosheth defended himself, your estate should be divided half and half. Only half belongs to you, the other half goes to your slave. So there was like a partial belief. For that, David HaMelech was punished. So he was punished. We were trying to point out that because of tshuva and owning up a mistake, God forgives you. And when God forgives you, a person is spared from sickness and from worry. That Bishosh Amar David. Guys, Shabbos Nun Vav, the whole sugi there. When David tells Mephibosheth, after Mephibosheth shared to David his side of the story, Amarti, I say that Atov et Siva, you and Siva, Techalku es Asada, should divide your estate. That's because he partially believed Siva. So when that happened, Yotza Baskol V'Amroloig, God tells David, you're dividing the estate of Shaul, I'm going to divide your whole kingdom. Now Rechavam was the son of Shlomo. But then Shlomo had an Eved called Yeravam, the wicked Yeravam, and Taka, after the passing of Shlomo, the kingdom of the Yidden were divided into two. So God tells him, Rechavam and Yeravam Yechalko es HaMalchus. So he was punished. We're trying to point out how a person is spared from sickness, spared from worry, because of them owning up and returning to God. Now, let's go weiter with Shaul HaMelech. It says in the pasuk, Ben Shana Shaul B'Molchei. Guys, the pshat doesn't mean he was 1 year old. The pshat is, when it says in Tanach that during the first year of his reign, that's the normal pshat. The Gemara is not taking the pshat. The Gemara is saying, no, Ben Shana Shaul B'Molchei. Shaul was 1 year old when he was a king. What does that mean? It doesn't mean he was 1 year old. Amar Afuna, Ke Ben Shana. Shaul was so pure, he was like the most naive person. He was pure. He was like a 1 year old. Sholei To'am Tam Chet. Doesn't even know what a sin tastes like. Maskevlad of Nachman by Yitzchak, I like your drush. He was like a 1 year old, but you can look at the other way around. A 1 year old is very dirty. Maybe Ve'ema Keven Shana. Maybe he's like a 1 year old. Shemaluchlach Betit V'tzoya. Maybe that's the meaning of the verse. So what's the answer to that? The answer was he had a very scary dream that scared him off that even question. So it says the Gemara that Achaviyu later Rav Nachman, this Rav Nachman that asked the question, maybe it means something negative about Shaul. So Siyuta, Rashi says Siyuta is some sort of angelic terrorist. That really, when you have a nightmare like the worst angel that comes to hurt people, to bring anguish, is Siyuta. Siyuta came to the dream of Rav Nachman. That's the Meiri says Siyuta means a strap that they used to give Malchus. So even for asking such a question, he was shown in his dream that he should get flogged for that. That's a Yiddish answer. We're not going into Seichel here. We're just telling a person, you're so wrong, be careful what you're saying. And right away, when he saw that in the dream, he also did tshuva. Amar, he says, Na'anesi lachem upapa. He said, he apologized to Shaul. He says, I spoke excessively against you, and you are to the bones of Shaul ben Kish. Alpi Chasidus, to the essence, because Shaul was the greatest tzaddik. So I offended you, I apologize. But that wasn't enough. He only apologized to the bones of Shaul ben Kish. By the way, Shaul is from the Shevet of Binyamin. He still had this angel came to scare him, to frighten him in his dream, because he was not respectful enough. And Omar, he said, again, he apologized, he did tshuva. He said, Na'anesi lachem. I spoke excessively against you, and the you is Atzomois Shaul ben Kish Melech Yisrael. He needed to acknowledge that Shaul is a Melech B'Yisrael. Okay, so here again, even in this side story, we see the power that if a person makes a mistake, but they are spared as long as they own up and they do tshuva. They admit, I was wrong and I apologize. Now, this is l'choira, again, this is just, the Rebbe didn't say this for some reason. But when the Rebbe was insisting that Shaul did not have freedom of choice, here the Gemara is saying, why didn't his kingdom endure? Well, the answer is because he didn't kill Agag. So what's even the kasha? The kasha is that him not killing Agag was not fully as a bchira. So the Gemara says, you know what was the fault of Shaul HaMelech? He was too perfect. It's very interesting, Gemara. He had no genealogical inaccuracy. He had no blemish in his yichus. He was pure Gesha. That was his sin. Not a sin. That's why God didn't want for such families to be the kings. Because it's so advantageous for someone to know that their yichus is not perfect. It keeps them humble. So it's a whole different understanding. It's not because he sinned. He sinned. We're not taking that away. But again, maybe it wasn't fully his. Noira alila al bnei adam. He was meant to have the sin. The problem with Shaul was there was no doifi. There was no flaw in his yichus. Listen to this. When you want to appoint a communal leader, make sure you are appointing someone that doesn't have as a perfect yichus. Not stam imperfect yichus. You want to find someone that has a known flaw in his genealogy, in his yichus. Why? Because the moment this leader becomes arrogant, and they'll all become arrogant, then they tell him, here's a chayin. You're becoming a balgaivenike, you're becoming as a over us. Take a look at what's behind you. Look at your father, look at your Zayda. Can you imagine? What a liner. So what was the problem with Shaul? His yich was perfect. His father was a tzaddik, his Zayda was a tzaddik, perfect Gesha. God says, I don't want the kingdom to be in this family. Why was he punished? Again, you can say he was punished because of his, he didn't kill him, and the Gemara is not going on that line. You know why he was punished? Because he was too humble. It's been akotza la akotza. Too humble means, he completely renounced his honor. Now, as a yachid, that's the way we should be. You have to be completely humble. But once he was appointed as a leader, he needed to stand up for his honor. Shenemar, as it says, this is going back to the first count, right before he became king. Again, this is the siege, that when Shaul HaMelech was going to gather troops to fight the siege of the Ammonites. So it says, Ubenei Belial Amru, that no goodniks began to say negatively against Shaul, what, he's gathering soldiers, how can he save us? And v'yivazu, they ashamed him. They didn't bring him a gift afterwards to apologize. And Shaul was quiet the whole time. He ignored them. He was very humble, like a 1-year-old, like a perfect tzaddik. And it says, Vayal Nachashu Amoini, that the snake of the Ammonites came. Vayichan, and they made a siege on the city of Yavesh Gilad. Now the vav in the Goymer is essential. So look inside the Rashi 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Umaskon of them also was that after Shaul HaMelech successfully broke the siege, so Sha'amru Yisrael mi, so he won. So the Yidden began to say, Mi ha'emer Shaul yimlei cholenu bitmiya. Who was the ones before challenging Shaul's ability to be the king? These Bnei Belialniks. And the people, to defend Shaul, they wanted to exact revenge on them. Tenu ha'anashim v'namising. Shaul HaMelech says, don't do anything to them. Today no one will get killed. In other words, he renounced his honor. So God says, someone who has such a level of bittul, that's amazing, but such a person and his family cannot be the kings over the Jewish people. A lot more to be continued.